I always remember that one. I mean, you work with cameras so much, you always
Well,
remember.
it's got a nice red light on it.
Tele light, yeah. This one here, we are going. So,
Yeah.
welcome to Trapping Inc. Scuttlebutt podcast, and we have a very special guest tonight. We have the director?
No, President and CEO.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
I already got it wrong.
Yes?
President and CEO of the Alberta Conservation Association, Todd Zimmerling. I got that right.
You did? Yep.
Good pleasure to have you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
And of course, I get full disclosure. Sandi happens to be the treasurer for the ACA here in Alberta.
Yeah. So that's Todd and I have known each other a little longer than that, but I've officially been a part of the board for 2 years, just past my 2-year anniversary, and was just reaffirmed as treasurer for the organization. And
I didn't know that.
It's a big honor.
As of today, yep.
Yeah.
Our lives are so busy; we collide so infrequently. It seems that I didn't know that you were treasurer again.
Yeah. Well, it just happened this afternoon. We've been busy. So anyway, Todd, thanks so much for taking the time to sit down and chat. Maybe you can just tell us a little bit about you, how you came to be in this role with the ACA.
Oh, first, we got to get dirt first. I want to know about
dirt
Yeah,
first.
right back to the stories about his mom taking him to his grad. Or
Oh,
that
wow.
guy.
That will be
I
a
don't
lot of
think-
dirt.
No, I want to know your bona fides. Like, I mean, the ACA is like everything wild in Alberta, practically. I think, and I want to know, about you. Like personally, do you hunt? Do you fish? Do you trap?
I'm definitely a hunter and angler, and I'm fortunate enough to have a family that does it all with me. I've got a wife who outfishes me and outhunts me every single time I go out, so that's
We don't
always a
even talk
pleasure.
about that.
Yeah,
That's
Oh, you know, that's very.
It's
You have that in common with him.
Yeah, exactly. And I have 2 kids. I call them kids. They're 20 and 21 now, but they've always hunted and fished with us as well. So the whole family's always done that. So yeah, we're definitely very big into that. Yeah.
You know, there are some things that are monumental. For some people, it's when their child shoots its first animal, and that was our daughter when she shot her first deer, and it was during one of the great. Well, a day similar to today in Pincher Creek. We were living in Pincher Creek. There was 140 wind blowing. First day that I ever saw cow pies blow across the prairie. It was, the half-dried ones would actually pry them up and it would blow them across it. She shot a deer at about 240 yards in that wind, and it was her first deer, and it was just a doe. But it was fantastic. But she, it happened kind of in a rush, and she was a little bit excited, and she got too close to it. She was using her mom's Broad 270, and she ended up scoping herself. So there's all this wind going on and everything else, and this deer takes off just like Dale Earnhardt's car, and pretty soon starts making a hard left, and then, like big tumble, and she turns around, there's blood running down her face. She's a little dazed. I remember that so much. That was the major experience with her. With my oldest boy, it was his first sheep. Very proud moment to be on the mountain with him for that. And with the youngest boy, it was first moose. I know muzzleloader moose it was to boot. So very, very, very proud moment. So what was your proud moments with yours?
I've got very, very similar stories. Like my son, he's a year older, so he got to be hunting first. And I remember going out with him the first morning, and Mom and my daughter were, they set up at one end, and Dad and him went up to the other end. We were on a field, and we sort of got seated, and I was going over with them. Okay, here's where you can't shoot. All right, we know there's a building off that direction, so you make sure you're not shooting there. And we know Mom and Amanda are over there, so here's where you can shoot. So if it's here and you look up and there's a deer standing there already, and I hadn't even finished explaining to him what he could or couldn't do. A little bucket walked out, and like, okay, well, that's in this range we're allowed to shoot. You can shoot that if you want. So he didn't have time to be nervous or excited. He just got up and and he lined it up, and I remember saying, it's foggy. I'm like, what do you mean it's foggy? Well, I'm looking through my scope and it's foggy. I'm like, well, he had breathed on the scope, right? I think, okay, well, can you see the deer in the scope? Yes. Can see the crosshairs on the deer? Yes. Okay, so it doesn't have to be crystal clear. As long as you can tell that's your deer, you can see the antlers, you know exactly where you're aimed on it, you pull the trigger. Okay, so he pulled the trigger and down the deer went. But it was, his hunt was all of 5 minutes. And 4 of the minutes was me explaining where you can or cannot shoot. So to him, this whole deer hunt thing was pretty simple to get started. You know,
Got her
just like
knocked,
that. Yeah. But with my daughter, it was a moose as well. And so we were out at Blackfoot Grazing Reserve, and we just live about 15 minutes from there. And we'd been out probably 4 mornings in a row and hadn't seen a bull yet. Had seen cows, and finally on our, I think, 4th or 5th morning, we're walking down a trail and we were looking into all the openings, and there's a couple of bulls standing in an opening, and so we sort of creep up on them and get her I got out a shooting stick for her, so she set her gun on her shooting stick, and I had my binoculars out, and the 2 bulls were sort of walking like this, and okay, as soon as the left one steps out, you can take that one. Oh, wait, no, it's the right one. No, it's the left one. So that was like a 5-minute, this one and that one. When one is clear, pull the trigger on it. And so finally one stepped clear, and she shot, and it just dropped like a stone, like straight down. And I said, okay, well, that's great. And I'm just watching through the binoculars, and that's great. Now put another shell in just in case it gets up. And I'm waiting. And I don't hear another shell going in, and I'm watching. Amanda, put another shell in just in case it gets up. A moose can get up easily. There's still nothing, and I turn around to look at her, and same thing. I think I cut myself. I'm great big blood running down, and yeah, you cut yourself, and she wasn't used to shooting off a stick, and so she just hadn't held it as hard, and she had the big gash across the top of her eye, and I said, well, I grabbed some snow and stuck it on her hand, like, how do we do this? Keep it, and I said, well, keep an eye on that moose. What are we doing? Well, if it happens, I'm going to shoot the other side. She said, I can't see the other side at the moment. But the moose stayed down. It was great. And then, the 2 of us packed that moose out. We had, because it was in Blackfoot, it was foot access only. So we had about a kilometer pack to get it out. But it was on a trail. We put, we got it out to the trail and got a sled and got it out. And it was a great time. And then, of course, we went home, got all cleaned up, and then I took her to the Medi Center, and she walks in, and of course the receptionist says, "Oh, what are you here for?" "Oh, well, cut my eye." "Oh, how'd you do that?" "Oh, scope." And you can see a scope, and she's looking at me, and she goes off to the room, and the nurse comes in, and "Oh, I got hit by a scope." A scope, and then I'm like, oh great, and cops are gonna be showing up here soon. I want to know what Dad's doing, and finally the doctor came, got her stitched up, and she was good. So, but then I think I'm the only one in my family doesn't have. My dad and my brother, they both have the same cut. And I said, well, no, none of one. Now you're one of the guys. So,
I took one of our boys to the hospital so many times to get stitched up, and finally they said, well, now, Matt, tell us what happened. And I started to talk. They said, no, we're talking to Matt. Get out of the room. And I was like, oh, they think I'm wailing on him. So same thing, though. I was like, oh, cops are coming now. Yeah. Give the boy the look like, this is not a time to play around.
Exactly. But you always remember those experiences. It was just,
and
they're just
they
so
do
much
too.
fun. Oh, absolutely, they do. Yeah. No doubt about it. Yeah.
So you did it. You were raised in the life.
Yeah. I've been hunting. Yeah, basically ever since I was old enough to hunt with my dad. Yeah.
And your wife?
She wasn't a hunter until we met in high school, actually.
Yeah, you brought another one to the team.
Yeah.
I did the same here. Yeah. She didn't hunt nor fish, but she learned.
Yeah, well, and I guess maybe that's what attracted me to her. She was willing to try it. Something new. Sure, let's go give it a try. It took her a bit to get into the big game hunting. She didn't mind at all the bird hunting, but it took a bit to get into big game hunting. But now, last year she knocked down a 183 whitetail.
God, I hate those stories.
Yeah, and I packed it out for her. Yeah. I got a 8.3 whitetail.
Yeah. Me too. Me too. Yeah.
So she's good. Yeah, she's
biggest whitetail in our house is hers.
Yeah. Well,
mine isn't even in the house.
Yeah. Well, she's got the biggest whitetail and the biggest moose in our house.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I think we've always said if Mom hunts, fishes, traps, whatever, then the whole family does.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what brings more kids into it too, right?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Yeah. If we could get more moms involved, we would certainly have a lot more kids involved for sure. Yeah.
So professionally, you have to have some qualifications other than being obviously a great guide.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
what qualifications do you have to run the ACA?
I was just the best looking guy when they interviewed, so.
It was a bad day?
Yeah, it was a bad day. Yeah, exactly.
I got the glare from her for that.
Well, so I did my Bachelor's of Science at the University of Alberta here, and then I went off to UBC and did a Master's of Science there. I worked on snowshoe hares in the Yukon for a couple of years, yeah.
Oh, I got lots of questions.
And then, I got done that, and my wife and I, we got married while we were doing our master's. So my wife, Linda, also has a master's degree in forestry, wildlife, integrated management. So we started our own consulting company in northern BC. And while we were doing that, we had an opportunity to get a fairly substantial contract through the BC government. It was back when they had the Forest Renewal BC program going on, where they had a lot of funds coming into the forest industry to work on a wide range of projects. And so we had proposed looking at an issue that some of our forestry clients are having, where in second growth conifer stands, they would go in and they'd thin the stands out so the trees would grow faster and grow better. But they were finding is when they spent all the money thinning these trees, and then porcupines would move in and start chewing on the bark. And in a lot of cases, they were making the stand itself non-commercial. So they damaged so many trees, it just wasn't worth harvesting after all that. So we put together a proposal to the government to look at doing some type of habitat manipulations to see, what could we do in these stands that might reduce porcupine feeding damage. And so we got a huge grant to do that, and I figured we're going to work on it for 5 or 6 years. I could probably get a PhD out of it. So I called up my supervisor from UBC that I did my master's with and said, would you mind taking me back? And he said, well, do you have your own money? And I said, yeah. And he said, sure. All right.
That's easy.
Yeah, if you're paying for it, then okay. Yeah, so I was really lucky to be able to work as a consultant and did my PhD at the same time.
Is that higher education or higher finance?
Well, a little bit of both. Yeah, a little bit of both. So yeah, it worked out really well. Yeah.
So what did you learn about defeating porcupines?
We learned we couldn't. That's basically what we learned. So what we ended up actually doing was, and we were working with the forest company there, we had a number of different cut blocks, and we had them go along and do different thinning treatments. So we had, now we're going way back, me trying to remember all the details, but the normal stand was running about 4,000 trees per hectare. So pretty thick, like dog hair thick. And they would normally thin those stands down to somewhere around 1,600 stems per hectare. So we had a control site that was super thick, and we had them do some sites that were 1,600 stems per hectare. And then we had them do something at 800 stems per hectare. And then we did an extreme that was basically at the minimum they'd need for it to be commercial was 400 trees per hectare. And at that point, you could drive a truck through the stand without hitting a tree. And the theory was that as you opened up the stand, there were several things that porcupines, if they're reading the books, should know, that the trees are getting too far apart, so they're using a lot of energy going through the snow from one feeding spot to the next feeding spot, and their predation risk is increasing. Right. And when they're in a tree, risk of predation is relatively low. On the ground, it gets a lot higher. So if you get your food source really spread out, you're spending a lot of energy, and your risk of getting eaten by something else is getting really high. So probably not a good place to be. You should just bugger off. It turns out the porcupines did not see it that way. and all that happened is in the 400 stems per hectare stands, they went in and they would just sit on one tree for a much longer time and completely strip it.
Destroy it.
Yeah, completely. Like rather than just taking a chunk of bark like this, they just take the whole entire tree and then move. So there was a higher risk for them moving to the next tree, but they were doing it less often.
Yeah.
So they sort of compensated for it, and it was like, well, I guess that's why they're out there in the wild. They learn to evolve and adapt to those kinds of things. Yeah.
You got outsmarted by someone that eats pine bark for a living.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. Yeah. So. Yeah.
I'm gonna make you go back even further. What is the most interesting thing you learned about a snowshoe hare?
Well, so when I was working on snowshoe hares, I was actually working just on the boundary of Kelowna National Parks. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Yukon. And so Kelowna Lake is right there, and I was working on Jacko Island, which is off of the shoreline of Destruction Bay. So if anybody knows that area, it's a little tiny island out in the middle of a lake in the middle of nowhere. So
And it's sounding forbidding.
yeah, well, yeah. And so this little island, there have been other students out there over the years working on snowshoe hares, because there's a research base up there as well, the Arctic Institute at the one end of the lake. And so UBC and U of A and University of Calgary and a bunch of different universities have a research base. I've had lots of grad students there, but they've been working on a snowshoe hare cycle up there for, well, now it's probably almost 30 years. But they were looking at what's driving the snowshoe hare cycle. Is it predators? Is it food? Is it stress in the animals? That sort of thing. All those things have been looked at. But when they worked on this island and had students out there, they noticed that the hares out there were not cycling in sync with the mainland. So, well, you had a 10-year cycle on the mainland with the hares. There was no discernible cycle on this island. And so why was that? And that's basically what my research is trying to look at, is trying to figure out some reasons as to why this island might not be cycling with the rest of the population. So I was looking at specifically survival of juveniles, and because that seemed to be, well, that certainly drives the increase in hares, is all of a sudden you get a lot of juveniles being born. I know a single female is giving birth to 4 litters in the spring, and each of those might have 6 or 8 young, and they're all surviving, and that's what causes such a rapid increase in the population. So I was capturing snowshoe hares that were pregnant and putting them in a little pen, basically, for anywhere from a week to, well, sometimes just one day, till they gave birth. And as soon as they gave birth, I would stick radio transmitters on the backs of the leverets, the baby hares, and let them all go. And so with hares, unlike rabbits, hares are born ready to go. Their eyes are open, they got all the fur, they can survive on their own. But what they do is they stick around close to where they were born, and the female will come back every once in a while to feed them. So she'll go to the log they were born beside, and they'll all come to her, and she'll feed them there for the first, week to 10 days, and then they'll get a little bigger, and they'll start to move a little further away.
So they're a real turnkey operation.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I was putting the radio transmitters on them and following on a day-to-day basis to see how many were surviving.
We should have had that style for our kids.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mark that down.
A little late to turn the clock.
Yeah, exactly. So basically what I found is, because it was a closed population, we had a kilometer of open water between this island and the mainland, that essentially stochastic fact, random factors is what was driving it. So one year I was there, a lynx got trapped on the island. So it was there during the winter,
Right.
Ice broke off, and that was stuck on this little island. So as a result, this lynx went just crazy,
Yeah.
killing everybody out there, right?
Yeah.
Then it didn't have much of an area. The island itself was under 2 square kilometers. So for a lynx, that's not a lot of hunting area for it. So, regardless of how many babies are surviving, the lynx was driving the population down and preventing any cycle to get started. Another spring I was there was no predators on the island. That's untrue. There was an owl on the island, but they were flying all over the place. But what seemed to be driving the population that year was we had some bad winter storms, spring storms. And so if a female happened to have had the young within 3 days before a storm came, those young were dead. Because the wet, heavy snow from the spring would get on, they get wet, and they die, basically freeze to death. They get too wet.
We have that happen with grouse.
Yep. Same sort of issue.
When they're first hatched, if it rains too much, we will lose an entire crop in the spring.
Yeah, and so because this island it had a burn, so there wasn't a lot of tall, mature trees to stop snow. It was mostly actually willow, which is why we also had a lot of moose running around there. Because you had lots of this willow, not a lot of big cover to stop snow from coming down, the baby hares were very exposed to the weather. So random events were preventing the cycle from necessarily getting started. If a predator was stuck, if we had bad spring, that just drove the population down immediately because the population was so closed in the first place. So.
And perhaps the population was so small that it didn't take a very significant variable to affect it.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So it was interesting work for sure. Very different. I spent basically I spent 2 summers, dropped out on an island, myself and at most maybe 2 other people. So, yeah.
So, just because I got to know before we move on. My belief is that she has those 4 litters and there's 4 to 6 and eventually you hit a tipping point where it's like an out of control juggernaut and that's why the population cycle goes. Is that the actual fact, or what am I missing?
Well, I don't think anybody still has pinned down exactly why, but the explosion, from lows to highs is certainly that you end up with females having a high number of litters and a large number within each litter. So, a single female might be producing 24, 30 juveniles every spring. And, you know it as a trapper, during the low of the snowshoe hare cycle, the lynx tend to crash. Mm-hmm. And so without the predator, all those bunnies survive. So the next year you get that many. So a couple of years of each one of those producing 30 more, it causes a rapid expansion. The decline part is more what the research has been trying to look at. And it looks like, you read a bunch of different papers on different aspects. It just looks like a combination of different things. It's certainly predators play a role at certain points within the cycle that, the lynx catch up, and now there's lots of them that can eat them. You run into issues with habitat degradations because the hares have eaten most of the best food. So, they have issues there. There's also work that's shown that there's stress hormones increase in the hares as their populations increase. So there's just more interaction between individuals. They get more stress. Those stress hormones reduce the reproductive output. So the females actually start having smaller litters. So there's a whole combination of things that seem to go on.
It's fascinating because I just touched briefly on a study, and they were talking about the effects, the genetic effect of animals being born during hard times, like starvation, like with rats. Rats that were born to a mother who was starved and underfed, and that she might abort some of them, but the ones that were born, they were genetically or had genes turned on in them that caused them to eat faster, eat everything in sight, grow faster, grow stronger, breed earlier. And that was the evolutionary reaction to the mother being in a hard time, and that this sometimes passed down through 4 generations in the rats.
Yep.
And they're thinking perhaps what this research was all about was obesity in humans, and if that had anything to do with it. I know it's just because I like eating.
Yeah. But they think all those obese people are having hard times? I don't know, all right. They might be stressed, but I don't know how hard the times are. Yeah.
So it was fascinating anyway.
Yeah.
So you became a master, or did you get your doctorate?
I got PhD. So
PhD, your doctorate. Good for you. Congratulations. And how did you end up over this side of the mountains?
Well, so as I had said, we'd started, my wife and I had started our own consulting company. So we grew that company where we had offices here in Alberta. We had an office in Rocky Mountain House, an office up in Grand Prairie, and we had an office up in Yukon and Whitehorse, and we had a couple offices in BC. So we were working a lot in BC, mostly in forestry. But when you opened up the office over here, we started working more in oil and gas. And, to be honest, we opened our office, I don't know if you remember, it's got to be almost 15 years ago now, when DFO really ramped up their presence in Alberta. They showed up, they had, I think they had maybe 2 or 3 people, and then they decided, no, they're going to ramp it right up, and they came in with 40 people, and all of a sudden, the Fisheries Act was being enforced. And
DFO, define DFO?
Department of Fisheries and Oceans,
okay.
Sorry. Yeah. So there was a lot of companies that didn't know how to deal with the Federal Fisheries Act because it hadn't really been enforced much here in the past. We were lucky in that we had been working in BC all this time, where Fisheries and Oceans was there all the time. That's all we dealt with. Yeah. And so we actually, Linda and I, my wife and I, moved back to Alberta. My wife was born just outside of Edmonton here, so she was from Alberta, and we'd both done high school here, right in Sherwood Park. So moving back to Alberta was a good thing for us. We enjoyed it, but we came back because there was just so much opportunity to work with the oil and gas industry.
You spoke government.
Basically,
it's an unknown language to many people.
Yeah, and it wasn't even that these oil and gas companies didn't want to follow. They just didn't know what they had to do to follow the rules because it just hadn't been enforced. So from there we just sort of grew the business significantly with that kind of work. And after 10 years, we were approached from a national engineering firm out of Toronto that was trying to grow, and we were at the point where we'd grown too big to compete with the mom and pop shops anymore. 2-person crews can, they charge a lot less than what we could, but we weren't big enough to compete with the national firms, so we were stuck in we either grow ourselves or do we merge with somebody else. So we ended up selling to a national firm, and I worked for them for a couple of years. Found I just didn't like working for somebody else that much. And so when this position at ACA came up, I was quite interested in it. And the truth is, I got into biology in the first place because I liked working with wildlife. I liked the outdoors, fish, wildlife. That's what was interested to me. I'd become essentially a regulatory expert in the consulting world. So my job was sitting in boardrooms in downtown Calgary and, figuring out how the next multi-billion-dollar pipeline was going to get through and making sure all the paperwork was going to be done properly and all the assessments. And I wasn't getting to really deal with wildlife or fisheries at all.
You didn't like having your hat handed to you. You'd rather have your hat handed to you by a porcupine than...
Yeah, basically. And, I looked at ACA, and the truth is, I didn't know a lot about ACA when I was first approached, and, I was actually, my name was put forward by a former employee that had been working for me as a consultant and had taken a position with ACA, and I guess he passed my name along to the committee that was looking at recruiting people. And, I looked into it, and the more and more I looked into it, this is actually more why I got into biology, the hunting and fishing aspect, conserving habitat, working with hunters and anglers. That just seemed like a lot more fun than as much fun as the oil and gas people are. Working with the hunters and anglers seemed like it would be a lot more fun. And, it's been great.
So what is the mission of the Alberta Conservation Association?
So essentially what we want to ensure is a future Alberta that has fish, wildlife, and habitat for all Albertas to enjoy, value, and use. And I think one of the key things we have is that use part of it.
The use.
Yes. I mean, a lot of, I won't say a lot, other organizations are very concerned about conserving wildlife and fish, but they're not necessarily as concerned about ensuring people are able to use them. Some consumptive use is certainly what we're interested in. Yeah.
People don't understand is that you can't put that wildlife on the shelf.
Yep.
You can't. And not only that, that it doesn't work because you end up creating more problems with population than that. But the fact is, then it loses a value to the humans. And it's one of the things when people talk about hunting in Africa. In Africa, they have a saying where if it pays, it stays, and what that simply means is that if it has a value, it's going to survive. Like they say, we'll never run out of pigs and chickens because somebody's always eating pigs and chickens. Yeah. So that animal has to have a value, in order for people to care about it. And so I'm wholeheartedly behind the consumptive use. How did ACA get started?
So ACA started back in 1997. And before that, there was a Buck for Wildlife Fund. So if you were buying a hunting license, you could have a check off where money, presumably originally a buck, I couldn't tell you what it started as, but I'm assuming it was a buck to start with, was going into a fund. And that fund was meant to augment projects that Fish and Wildlife was doing at the time. And so that fund had grown into the several million, I think it was $6 or $8 million at that time. And that was, this was back in the days, not too dissimilar to now, where deficits were hitting the government. The government was looking for ways of, paying down debt. Where can we get extra money? And hunters and anglers got a little concerned that fund might disappear into general revenue. And so it was really a push by the stakeholders who had put the money into the fund to try to segregate that money away from government itself so that there was a little more control and it didn't disappear. And that's essentially where ACA got formed, as the decision was made.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Been a long day of talking. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So the decision was made at that time to create the ACA. And some of the staff we have today were there at the very beginning, and when I talked to them, it was essentially, well, Monday morning you come in, because part of your salary had been working on projects that were being paid for by this Buck for Wildlife Fund before, you've got a choice. You can either come in and now put on an ACA hat, you're an ACA employee because that's where those funds now are, or, here's your pink slip kind of idea. So they were, told that that's where you're now. You're now an ACA employee. And so it sounds like it was relatively abrupt, although, to be honest, I wasn't there, so I don't know. Maybe it was a lot smoother, but from the probably half dozen employees that we have here, it was fairly quick, and that was the decision. Here we go. We're going to put this aside in the ACA.
Unfortunately, in Alberta, very revenue-rich province, the whipping boy has always been the wildlife, and Fish and Wildlife Division. It seems that whenever they want to cut money, that's where it gets cut out of. So it was a good move to move the funding for the ACA out of general revenue, where everything had always been going was to general revenue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So from its original mission or idea, how has it changed?
Well, I don't think the mission has changed as much. Certainly, I think how we operate and interact with government has evolved over time. Clearly in the first couple of years, it was basically government staff that had just, put on a different hat. So it was very government-like, and I think a lot of the direction of what they're working on, that sort of thing, came directly from, the local biologists that needed to do this, that, and the other thing. Stakeholder groups wanted to have more input into how those funds are being used, and certainly they feel an ownership. Alberta Fish and Game and Alberta Trappers and APOS and all those groups that sit on our board, their members feel an ownership of those funds, and so they have a lot more input into what happens with now than I think what happened in the very beginning.
How many user groups do you work with?
So we've got 9 on the board.
Okay.
But we work with essentially anybody who we think we can do a partnership with. Ducks Unlimited doesn't have anybody on our board, but we work with them a lot on wetland work like that. Nature Conservancy, not on the board, but we work with them on habitat.
So when you say partnership with, what does that entail?
So it'll range anything from, for instance, with Nature Conservancy, we'll both put money into purchasing a piece of land set aside for habitat. So it'll go that far. In the case of Ducks Unlimited, we did a lot of work where we'll buy a piece of land and then we'll have them come in and do the wetland restoration on it because they're the guys that know how to do that.
Okay. So you have this fund of money and you use it for grants, studies?
Yeah. So, so that pot of money came over with us, but what also came over was a levy and hunting license. So that Buck for Wildlife checkoff is now changed into a levy. So when you buy a hunting or fishing license, most of those licenses, the majority of what you're paying will come to ACA as a levy. And it don't ask to say how much because it varies depending on what license. A whitetail is one and an elk is different, and it's all over the place.
Why would that be?
So I asked that question of some of the more senior people at Environment who were there when it was first done, and it sounds like a group of people like us got together in a room and said, well, how much more would somebody be willing to pay on an elk license? Oh, well, $3 more. Okay, well, then $3 will be the levy. And how much more on a whitetail? A whitetail, probably only $2. So
okay.
It sounds like that's sort of what do we think the market could bear for a little bit extra funds to go on as a levy. And as a result, it was a little bit here and a little more in there, so it varies. And so over the years, we've gone for a 5% increase on the levy. So a 5% increase on $3 is different than a 5% increase on $2. So
Absolutely.
Then they've changed a little bit more. So it's a little bit all over the map as to how it's gone. But so now what happens is when somebody buys a license, whether it's fishing or hunting license, the levy money will come to ACA. And so we use that to operate on a year-to-year basis. So we basically we get about $14-15 million a year on levies every year to operate with. Yeah.
And of course, you have employees?
Yes, we have 84 staff. Yeah.
Okay, and they are all biologists or mostly biologists?
Most of them are biologists. I think it's something about 65 are biologists. So we do have to have.
And you have
some
offices all over the province.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. From Peace River down to Lethbridge, we've got offices. Yeah.
This is to facilitate your different programs, projects that you work with?
Yeah, because we're doing work all over the province as well. You know, we're doing work, we've done work up north around Rainbow Lake on Wolverine. We do work way down in the southeast corner on habitat work and working with ranchers on grasslands, and we're in the mountains or, off in the parklands. So we're all over the place doing work.
You mentioned the Wolverine one. That's actually, being a trapper, that's a favorite of mine because at one point there was talk about closing down the Wolverine trapping, and it was mostly because we had this much knowledge about the Wolverine. There was zero. Nobody had ever done a study. They were called the ghosts of the wilderness, and the reason was they were ghosts. Nobody knew anything about them. Well, there were all these suppositions and beliefs, and it was kind of like your porcupine won't go the extra few steps to the next tree, and when you did this, it was a groundbreaking study. First, it was a major cooperation between the trappers and the ACA, and you did this groundbreaking study, and you discovered things like, sometimes several females will den together, and before that, it was believed that each one of them had hundreds of square kilometers they claimed as their own, and then they discovered that the dad of all things would take a son or two with him for a year or so and wander around with them, right? There were just so many fascinating things that we were learning.
Yeah, I mean, and kudos to the Alberta Trappers, because they really were the ones that initiated the project. They came to ourselves, to ACA, to say, this is a potential issue for us, that we don't have data, and there is potential for changes to how we can trap these species. What can we do? And so then ourselves and ATA sat down with U of A. We talked with Dr. Mark Boyce, who also sits on our board, and he had interest, and so he got a graduate student. So between U of A and ourselves and ATA, it's been a great project, and it resulted in a fair number of very interesting results that no one had really looked at before. And I don't believe there's really been much done on wolverines at all in the boreal.
No,
that was the big thing. Usually it's in the mountains that people have been looking at them, not in the boreal. And so
I think people always believed that they didn't exist in the
there
boreal.
wasn't enough of them to worry about.
Exactly.
And it turns out, no, they're pretty good numbers in some areas for sure.
Well, and that just kind of takes us off onto another topic, and that is just around the other things that the ACA does, and that is the 2 grant programs that we run. So maybe you can speak to that a bit.
Yeah, certainly. So we have our conservation, community, and education grants, which essentially they're, I would say, non-researchy type grants. So if a group wants to, let's say, put a dock in to improve fishing access at their local pond, they can apply for a grant to that. Or if they want to do some type of novice hunt or novice shoot or mentor program, they can apply for funds for that. In some cases, as groups just wanting to put together birdhouses, just get a bunch of kids outside to do something that's related to the outdoors. So it's sort of community group orientated kinds of projects. And then we also have the research side of our grants. So we have grants in biodiversity, which is for students. So it's master's or PhD students who are doing work in Alberta. So they can be at a university that is in Quebec, but as long as their work is actually occurring in Alberta, they can apply for funding for their research and support their degree. And then we have our research grants, which are, for the most part, they'd be the type of things that you'd have the profs at these universities applying on. And these the research grants are supporting world-class researchers. We've got some of the top researchers in the world working on grants that ACA has provided them and working on stuff in Alberta here, on a wide range of different projects. So it's really been good. We actually, at the board meeting today, we had a presentation of sort of the breadth of research that has been undertaking as a result of the funds that ACA has supplied over the years.
And that was really eye-opening even for a lot of board members that knew this work was being carried on. But I believe it was the library at the U of A that did some work for us and kind of compiling all that information and putting it into some pie charts and other types of charts, just to show how much, what the depth is in the reach of all those papers, how many times ACA was cited, how many papers there are. It was it 1900 and
something like that? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was quite interesting.
Yeah, over 21 years. That's, and has the grant program hasn't run that long, has it? 20 years?
Yeah, we have had grants for 20 years. We haven't had all 3 grant streams for all 20
Right.
years. Yeah.
But there's a significant amount of funds that are committed for that purpose. And I sat on one of the grant committees this year. It was the CCE grants that I sat on. It was very interesting projects out there in the community that people are looking for support of. And I think we gave away about $900,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's pretty significant when and that's just the community.
Yeah, overall
of it.
we're looking at about 1.5 million a year that we give out in grants. Yeah.
Yeah.
The community one, now that's the one where basically you're looking to create more win card holders, more users.
Well, at a certain point, yeah, I think that's the hope, but it's also the piece around conservation and
Right.
awareness and
But bringing people into the outdoors. Right?
yeah.
That's certainly an aspect, yeah, or restoring habitat. Some of the groups will apply to be able to plant willows on their local creek to try and improve the water quality in the local creek, that sort of thing. So it is, yeah, it's a wide range. Basically, it's just non-research. It's on the ground trying to do things either with the kids or with non-hunters or fixing habitat or, just a wide range.
And some of our partner groups are involved in applying for those grants as well, right? So you don't have to be, not affiliated,
Right.
but lots of our user groups have been involved.
Definitely.
In that.
Alberta Fish and Game gets funds. Alberta Hunter Education Hunter Education Instructors Association, they get funds. Wild Sheep has got funds.
Yeah,
APOS,
Alberta Trappers has
Alberta
got
Trappers,
funds.
yeah. So the member groups are encouraged to apply as well for various things. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
So what would you're supposed to be non-partial, but I know. What is a favorite project that's going on right now, or a favorite research, something that's got your interest with, something that's not got to do with Snowshoe Hare, but
Well, we just started a project on Prussian carp, and
cool.
Yeah, I find it really quite interesting because it's an invasive species that we now have in Alberta, and we know it's there, but we don't really know a lot about what is the impact.
How did it get here?
Well, we don't know exactly how it got here. So, there's...
I know that there were triploids, which can't produce, but they were used for grass, right? Grass carp?
Well, grass carp are different.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's one thing I had learned that I didn't know that much about carp in general, but there's a lot of different species of carp.
Yeah.
So Prussian carp aren't. So you've probably seen videos of down in the States of these carp leaping out of the water and
Yes.
knocking people out of. Well, Prussian carp only get to be maybe 12 inches long. So
Okay.
they're not these big giant things you see jumping all over the place. Yeah, I know exactly.
I also see where they would go running through and then they're shooting.
Yeah, I've seen every crazy thing possible trying to get rid of them. Yeah. So Prussian carp don't get that big. How they got here, we don't know. It may have been through the aquarium trade. Who knows? We don't really know. But what we do know is we now have them. They're in the I believe it's the Upper Bow system now, and a couple other watersheds, but we don't know to what extent. And more importantly, we don't know how negative their impact is.
Okay.
I mean, so far we haven't seen any dramatic impacts because of the carp, but it's a species that is highly adapted to be invasive in that the females don't need a male of the same species. Basically, they can use the sperm of essentially just about any other minnow species that we have.
No way.
Yeah, so right, so they literally have no need for males of their own species. So, yeah.
So if we have a red horse sucker have one too many at the bar that night,
Yeah,
that
right?
Prussian carp's looking pretty fine.
And they can survive in very poor water conditions. They can survive in low oxygen conditions that our native fish cannot survive in.
They are very durable,
Yeah,
aren't they?
so it's just the ultimate invasive species. So the question is it worse than a brown trout?
Yeah.
Because the truth is, a brown trout is an invasive species, right?
Yep.
We brought it in. But now we find it a trophy fish. So is a Prussian carp something we have to be really worried about? I mean, my assumption is it will have some impact on our native fish, but how bad will the impact be? And that's really what we want to start taking a look at is this something we need to spend a lot of resources on to try and control, or is this something we just sort of have to keep an eye on and sort of monitor it? And at this point, we really don't know. We don't know how big an issue it is. So we've started with the basics of where do we know it is at this point in time, what information do we have, where people said they're finding it, and we'll sort of slowly add to that and trying to look at, okay, what are they feeding on? Where are they feeding? What impacts are they having on water quality? Are they competing with native fish for what they're eating and all those kinds of things?
I know that different bodies of water I've fished in through the United States and that they have carp, and I don't know which kind of carp, but they do tend to make problems where, like Lake Winnebago, they get back into the back bays, and most of the spawning walleye in Winnebago are cast on eggs. While they get in and they go through are cast on weeds, pardon me, and they go in there and they eat the weeds or the eggs and they stir it up to make it so turbid, and there's so much silt settles out that it kills off the eggs, right? So they're it's kind of like not directly were they attacking them, but it's still a form of competition that. So you don't know what the outcome is when you bring bring an invader in like that, and they are so, like you say, they don't need a lot of oxygen. They have all these genetic ways of adapting. They don't even need a male of the same species. It's fascinating how tough they are.
Oh yeah.
And the way they take over. Another invader that's just showed up in Alberta is the rusty crayfish. Are you doing anything on that?
Yeah, at this point, it's not a species that we're dealing with. But yeah, it's something again that we don't really know a lot about. What the impacts are going to be. But I imagine it will be something we'll probably end up looking at eventually. But yeah, right now it's not on our list of projects to be undertaking for this year.
I know we've just had a problem with whirling disease, and we're learning, through the studies and that it's not that it was introduced. It may have always been here, and that through some way it was triggered or it suddenly became active. Am I getting this right, or?
Yeah, I think you're right in that I think there's debate as to, depends on who you talk to, is whether or not they believe it has just arrived in the last couple of years or whether or not it's been here for 10 years and we just didn't notice it. Yeah, I think at this point, I don't think anybody really knows. I think there's a lot of theories of what's going on, but we really don't know. All we know is, where we're finding it now more than anything else, So, and it's spread across, a good chunk of the province at this point.
And it affected part of what the ACA's mandate is in terms of stocking ponds and whatnot with rainbow trout.
Yep.
So it affected the ACA's ability to stock ponds last year because a lot of the
couple of the growers
weren't cleared in order to be able to provide fish for stocking programs.
Yeah.
So that affected. But I mean, maybe you can speak a little bit to that too, Todd, because there's been a lot of really great things that have enabled the Kids Can Catch program and where that has come from. It's come from a lot of what ACA has done in terms of stocking ponds and other habitat that we've rehabilitated.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, we stock ponds across the province, and we've been trying to encourage more and more people to get out and use those. And what we've been really trying to do is get, I'd say, urban families is really what our target is, trying to get urban families interested in either trying it for the first time, or in a lot of cases it's remembering that you used to do it as a kid. And it's amazing the number of times so basically a Kids Can Catch event is essentially usually, like we do one in Fort Saskatchewan here. It's a long weekend, or it's a weekend where we, on a Saturday, we invite people out. We will provide them with a free hot dog, which always gets people out there. So they get a
If you
hot
feed
dog
them, they
and
will come.
Yeah, exactly. Something to drink, something to eat, and we'll provide a fishing rod, and we'll provide mentors there to show them how to use the fishing rod and what to do. So there's a bunch of volunteers that come out to help people learn how to fish. And
So that's in the summertime.
That's in the summertime, yeah. We do the same thing at Wabamun during the February Family Day weekend, same sort of thing. But the number of parents that get back to us and say, yeah, I used to fish, but I haven't taken my kid out. And so, thank you for sort of prodding me to come out and do this and remember I should be taking my kid out fishing. And that's really what we're trying to do. So it's been, but the Wabamun event is really quite interesting. We've had, I think we had 1,100 people out there. And,
wow.
Was it last year before? This last year was a little colder, so not as many, but huge numbers of people coming out on the ice there. And was really encouraging to see is a lot of new Canadians coming out. And, it's something that in some cases maybe they've never had a chance to do from, where they'd grown up, and it's something they're really interested in. And a lot of times you talk to them and it's something they see as it's Canadian. Ice fishing is Canadian, and I want to do something that's truly Canadian, right?
Yeah.
But you're dealing with people who've never been on ice before, and the number of people, our registration tent is on Wabamun Lake, and they get out there and they're asking, where is the lake? And you're standing on it right now, and you can see their eyes kind of like, I'm on top of the water right now, and so it's a completely different experience. But boy, they're sure keen, and they really want to get involved and do it. And it's been a great time. We had this past year all kinds of enforcement officers out there that were helping out, getting to talk to people and showing them how to set the jig up and put some bait on, and it's really a great time.
It's so funny when you talk about that, because I had a fella in Calgary who was a buddy. He was in oil and engineering. He had a friend come up from Texas, and he wanted him to go ice fishing because guy in Texas nothing like this. This is crazy stuff. So we could get him, and it was cold. It was one of those like minus 30 mornings, right? So we're driving out onto Pigeon Lake, and of course you get out there and it's just before daybreak, shut the lights off and it's quiet. And of course, minus 30, then the ice starts to crack and boom, right? Yeah. And he was terrified.
I'm terrified when that happens.
My wife does not like that at all, no.
He's standing there, and all of a sudden, you have one of those when you start drilling a hole and all of a sudden it just cracks and shoots out away from you. And it goes right underneath his feet. He jumps in the air like a scared cat. He says, my God, I felt that one. He says, you're sure this is a 4,000-pound truck sitting there. We're fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, it's when it doesn't crack. That's when you should be worried. Yeah.
But the best part was we had a great day of ice fishing and that. And he was just like an old hand at the end of it. We're driving home, and then of course warmed up and sunny in the afternoon. There's some kids. They've got the snow cleared off on a dugout, and they're playing hockey. Well, he had me stop, and he must have took 1,000 pictures of kids playing shinny hockey on a farm pond.
Yeah,
well,
the stereotypic Canadian right there. Right?
Yeah,
that was
that's a Norman Rockwell painting right there.
Yeah, exactly.
If he was Canadian, because and it was just something that was just every day of our life. And we connect with people all over the world through Trapping Inc. And I just had a fellow from Georgia, and we were talking back and forth, and he was saying, what was the humidity up there and that kind of stuff, and it was this was last week, right? And it was, I don't know, it was 70 or 80 in Georgia, and he hates that 100% humidity. I says, well, our humidity is pretty high, right? And it was at 80%. He says, 80%? How can it be that high there? Well, I says, it's about 10 below zero, your language. I said, if it gets any higher, we'd have ice fog. What's that? But I said, you got to understand it. 10 below zero, it doesn't have the ability to 80% is a very minuscule amount of moisture. We're very dry here. It's neat to talk to people about those differences.
Oh yeah,
those culture clashes, the stuff we take for granted. So that must be really cool, like introducing people. Especially, Alberta is blessed in so many ways. We are not blessed in water. We don't have a lot of bodies of water in that. So, for people to be able to get out and experience the ice fishing like that, that's very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. But, they're not blessed in bodies of water, and I think this is it's a story that we as Albertans have accepted without questioning. We don't have much water compared to Saskatchewan and British Columbia, but I would challenge people to take a look at how many bodies of water you have in Texas.
Yeah.
and down in some of those states, and they have fewer bodies of water and higher fishing pressure. So we don't have as much as our neighbors directly close to us. We still have a good number of bodies of water, and if you take a look at our catch rates, we have catch rates that will beat just about any other jurisdiction around here. You go out to Wabman or Pigeon Lake and you're hauling in, 10 walleye an hour.
Yeah.
That's a pretty high catch rate compared to just about anywhere else you're going to catch walleye.
I've fished a lot of places in North America. I've fished walleye all over, and I've fished some remarkable spots. I've fished Lake Erie and Lake Oahe, and I mean they're cyclic. Everything is cyclic. It's just we don't have a lot of bodies of water. Lesser Slave Lake, fabulous place to go fishing.
We also have, though, lots of ponds, which is maybe
what we
more
call lakes,
significant.
What we call lakes, most people call ponds. Yes,
Well, yeah.
that's part of the problem. Sure,
Right,
yeah,
but I mean,
yeah.
when you think about what the ACA has done in terms of habitat and so on around, stocking and managing some of the, really they are ponds, right?
Yep.
But so there is opportunity for people to get out, not very far from where they live, and participate. I mean, Fort Saskatchewan's one opportunity, but they just ACA just stocked one in Grand Prairie, right by the county sportplex, and that's been a huge success. So more and more of those kinds of good news stories get more people out and looking for those opportunities, and that's one of the big successes of ACA.
Yeah, that's certainly something that we're trying to do more of, is stock urban ponds, because that's really where where we want to give the opportunity for people who are living in cities, is the opportunity to fish. But it is a tough sell for a lot of municipalities to convince them to let us put fish in their pond, and a lot of it revolves around perceived liability risks.
Really?
Yep. And I've heard everything from, the water the water might be contaminated, so we don't want people near the water. Well, it might be
Is there a Darwinian theory that goes along here?
Might be contaminated. All right. If it is actually contaminated, then we should find out and do something about it. But to not provide a recreational opportunity like that on the possibility that it might be seems a little weak. But it's their call. They're in charge of municipality, and if they've decided the liability is too high, well, then we don't get to it. But I mean, we're sitting here in the Sherwood Park office. There's 40-some ponds within Sherwood Park. And there used to be, when I was a kid and lived here, there used to be fish in some of them. There aren't any fish in any of them anymore. And if you look at, basically just about any community, there's ponds around. Now, some of them weren't designed to fish ponds, no doubt about it. But that's another thing we could be looking at. Rather than having all these stormwater ponds that don't serve any function but stormwater, could we redesign them so they can work as stormwater ponds, but also as a fishery?
Well, okay, here's one of the cool things. This is one of the first things popped in my head when you were talking about opportunity, and that was that I fished once professionally as a fisherman, right? I was on the walleye trail for 5-6 years in the United States. Well, you end up places and you go golfing. Somebody wants you to go golfing. I'm not a big golfer or anything, but every one of those water hazards in those golf courses had fish in it. So pretty soon I've got a fishing rod instead of the 9-iron, and everybody else is trying to beat that white ball around, and I'm getting a largemouth bass out of the fifth hole. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, to me, that was fascinating, and I thought, well, I guess most of our ponds would in golf courses would freeze solid or whatever, but God, that would be so neat.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. Every one of them, there was crappie, there was there's white and black crappie, there was bream sunfish, there was all these different fish in that. I just found it just so fascinating. Yeah. But all these ponds that you're talking about, I mean, those are huge opportunities.
Yep. Yeah. So it's something we're working on, and we have to. Basically, I guess we have to get by this whole liability issue and figure out, how we can reduce that for the municipalities. And I can understand it. Was it this past spring? Maybe it was the previous spring, where a young girl died here in Edmonton. She went in to, I think, rescue her dog, and got stuck in the mud. So it's a tragic story, absolutely, no doubt about it. So there are some risks around some of these ponds for sure, but
there is risks to getting out of bed in the morning.
There is, absolutely. Absolutely. So, so that's something we have to sort of try and balance and figure out how we can get around that. But boy, it sure would change the landscape here in Alberta if everybody was within 500 meters of a fish pond.
wouldn't it?
Well, and I purely from a selfish point of view, as a rural redneck living out there, living the good life, I know that my future use of those resources depends on the urban people understanding it.
Absolutely, it does.
And that's where I really like what you're doing here. I didn't know anything about it. You don't tell me anything. You don't tell me anything anymore.
It's all a big secret.
Yeah.
I guess so.
So there's a couple of other things that I wanted to bring up too, because I think it's really important, because it's not just about fish and it's not just about grants, but it's, the Harvest Your Own program for hunting, and then also the land, the conservation lands that the ACA has acquired and works in partnership with other groups and whatnot. So maybe we can talk about those two things. So maybe Harvest Your Own first.
Yeah, so basically Harvest Your Own, we've got a separate website now, harvestyourown.com, but the whole concept was around this, trying to get, I would say, the non-hunting public interested in wild game by not talking about it as hunting, but talking about it as food. Mm-hmm. So we've got a huge movement out there of people looking for, no added hormones, no antibiotics, free range, you name it.
Ultimate organic.
Which that's what, when you hunt, that moose you shot has all those qualities.
Yep.
You know that it's been ethically killed because you are responsible for it. You know how the meat has been treated, for literally from field to fork. You know every step because you're the one doing it. And so that was sort of the campaign we've launched, is to try and target those people. And to be honest, the research shows it's younger people in that 20 to 35 range, and that's really what we're trying to do, is get them interested in the idea. If that's what you're looking for, check out wild game. Check out the idea of harvesting your own food. And so we developed the website, and it's got everything on the how-to, where you'd go to get a license, where you get your training in the first place, how you get your possession and acquisition for your rifle itself, then where would you go to actually harvest animal, and then we have videos on, okay, you've shot a deer, now what do I do? Well, there's how to clean it in the field and how to deal with it when you get it home, and then there's recipes. So it takes you through what should be all the steps that you'd want to go from, I have no idea what I'm doing, to master cook at the end. So that's essentially been our goal.
You can check out the recipes, the master cook part.
Oh, wow. No kidding. Wow. Now, there are some really good recipes on there. I'm not saying you need them, but I can tell you that my wife has grabbed a few of the recipes and done very well.
Well, Brad Fenson's a good friend of ours,
yes.
and he is, he's got some skills.
Yeah, and
guy.
that's where a lot of the recipes came from, was Brad. He was really a great help, with Brad Fenson Outdoors there, helping us out with articles and with recipes and that sort of thing. And it's been good. Interesting, I do a lot of waterfowl hunting and snow geese. I shoot a lot of snow geese, and most people you talk to, snow geese.
Well, your favorite recipe for snow geese always starts with, you're not even going to know it's goose.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Yeah. Most people tell you use the rock method. You boil it with a rock and then throw it out and eat the rock.
Yeah.
And, to be honest, for years it was always, good, we shot some geese. We'll have them. But no, with cooked properly, these things, cakes, you wouldn't tell it was a goose. You wouldn't tell it's snow goose.
I heard one of the board members yakking away about speckle
bellies,
and saying that they're awesome. We haven't had an opportunity to have any of that.
We did one time. I brought some specks home from a hunt, and they were good. We wrapped them in bacon. You didn't even know you eat goose.
How can you go wrong with bacon?
Well, exactly.
That's right. Yeah.
There's no doubt. There's a big difference between a speck and a snow goose for sure. But I encourage anybody, if you're new to it, or if you are a long-time waterfowl hunter and have some reservations about eating waterfowl and what they taste like, go to that website and check out some of those recipes, and I'll guarantee you'll have a new appreciation for the waterfowl for sure.
So what's your response been to this?
It's been really good.
Program? Yeah,
it's been really good. We've certainly had a fair good uptake within the public, and we've had a good response out of getting support. We've run a bunch of different campaigns or giveaways on the website to try to get more interest, and we've got a number of different companies that have thrown us some basically some swag to give away, and it's been really good. So a lot of support out there in industry as well. Yeah.
Biggest surprise? What you weren't expecting, or something that
You know, the biggest surprise is we've run a bunch of different ads on TV, and we had billboards in Calgary. And the biggest surprise is the lack of pushback.
Yeah.
I haven't had a single anti-hunter or anything like that. And I think the reason is because our messaging isn't about hunting. Our messaging is about
Food.
organic food.
Yeah.
And trying to change this discussion. We're not talking about hunting. We're talking about this is a food source.
I know, and you've changed the focus.
Yes.
You've taken out the hunting, the trophy aspect or the killing and all that. It's now food.
Yeah.
And people take a step back. I think Sandi and I get very, very little feedback, very little negative feedback on the trapping and that. I think it's because her and I are so boringly normal. You know, we are just boringly normal.
Well,
One of
you can speak.
One of you is.
You notice he's not pointing fingers.
but that's our secret weapon. We are so normal, and people take a step back and say, "Well, they're normal. Like maybe I got to at least give this trapping idea a little bit more thought." And that's what you're doing there.
Yep.
I mean, you're turning it into that food source, and that's fascinating. That's a great spin.
Yeah, and that's basically been our taglines has been, no hormones added, no antibiotics, free range, that's what these people well, here it is. It's right here. So, now you have to step back and figure out why you're not doing it. What's stopping you from not?
Well, it's funny because there was a study that I read where one of the biggest uptakes on hunting and hunting your own and the no hormones and that, where women, young women in Toronto, and they don't even tell their friends. It's like a dirty secret.
Yeah.
But they are so concerned about getting that organic, free range meat and that, and they've taken up hunting.
Yeah, and it's certainly we see it in our stats too. The fastest growing proportion is women in getting into hunting. Now, you start with a small number, then proportion, but still, that women are certainly coming into hunting more and more for sure. And we're seeing. The website's been great because we're getting more and more stories from women who say, "Hey, I went and I harvested my own animal." We had a young woman who in our office here actually went out and shot her own whitetail buck 2 weeks ago. Her husband stayed at home because the kids had to be off the hockey, and so she went out on her own, shot a whitetail buck, dragged this thing out of the bush on her own, threw it in the back of the truck, and I would guess that whitetail probably outweighed her about 2.5 times. Right? She not a big woman, and she did. Now, she thoroughly admitted for a week afterwards she had trouble walking. She was sore all over. But that was a heck of a feat and very impressive. But
when the adrenaline is flowing after that,
absolutely,
oh yeah,
absolutely, and
we've been there.
And there's no reason why a woman can't do that. And
kudos
great
to her.
See. Yeah. On the land side, so the habitat, that's something. So ACA has a fairly active habitat securement program where we look for opportunities to purchase habitat and set it aside in perpetuity for hunters and anglers to use, essentially. So we've had that been going on for quite a few years. We put together a guide every year. So you can get it in hard copy or even go to our website and look for the Discover Guide. And on there, we've got habitat we've purchased, Alberta Fish and Game has purchased, some that we've partnered with Nature Conservancy and Ducks Unlimited. So there's almost 800 different pieces of property.
And there are also those that have donated land as well.
Yeah, that's becoming a bigger and bigger thing. We're seeing the general population getting a little older and getting to that retirement age, and we're seeing a lot of people, oftentimes, ranchers or farmers that have sort of decided that they haven't got family who want to take over the land, and they'd like to donate it to conservation and make sure it's conserved going into the future. So it's been really good.
So the ACA is just a very broad-reaching organization and very unique, not just to Alberta, but unique across the country. So I think there's a lot of other provinces, states, territories that might be very interested in what we're doing here, and I think that's the case, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I get calls from other jurisdictions all the time, looking at how do we get our funding, how are we set up, how do we interact with government, that sort of thing. Because we're extremely unique, and you know what? our funding model is unique, but the other thing that is unique is the way we're governed by a group of different conservation organizations, so that we don't have, it's not a bunch of people out of the public who've just selected to sit on the committee or on the board. It is member groups who've selected individuals to sit on that board. So it is very unique in the fact that we have all these conservation groups that work together to form ACA.
And you also have, which I am one, is public at large members,
Yep.
which also represent the general public in the various quadrants of the province as well. So it brings a little bit more, not more balance, but a different balance
Yep,
to the board.
absolutely,
Right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's very unique that way for sure.
Well, tell everybody where the pertinent websites where they can go and check out your programs, your projects, the ACA, and we'll let you go. You've been on the clock a long time tonight.
Yeah, yeah. So it's just www.ab-conservation.com, and yeah, you can go from there, or you can go to harvestyourown.com. If you're someone who's interested in getting into hunting, that would be the place I'd recommend you start.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I've enjoyed talking to you. I'm going to pest you forever about them rabbits.
Hares, not rabbits.
Yeah, hares, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So the truth is, though, you question about the rabbits, not a problem, but the truth is my one claim to fame in the world is that I am one of 3 porcupine experts in Western Canada, because only 2 other people have actually worked on porcupines. That's how important they are, that only 3 of us have bothered to do it. So.
How big a discount does that get you at Tim Hortons?
Yeah, exactly. That's it's a good party conversation, but other than that, it hasn't really done anything for me whatsoever.
Thanks a lot, Todd.
Right,
I know
thank
it's
you.
been a
Thank
long
you.
day.
Yeah, I
and
appreciate
yeah,
it.
it's great, though, to have you here and tell everybody a little bit more about what we do here.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, folks, for watching us. We'll make sure that you check out us at www.trappinginc.com. All of our digital platforms and everything are there. Thank you.